Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Call Blocking, Call Labeling, Scammer Fraud, How to Improve Contact Rates in an Evolving Ecosystem. We would like to welcome the panel that has joined us today. But before we get started and before I introduce today's panel, I'd like to take care of two items of housekeeping. First, the content in this webinar is not meant to be legal advice on TCPA. We recommend that you consult a legal professional before making any changes to business operations or practices. Second, at the end of the webinar today, and time permitting, we will have a question and answer with our panel. But we would ask you to please use the webinar control panel to ask your questions, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of today's webinar. We are excited about the topic and today's panelists. Today we have Bryce Payne, VP of Business Development here at TCN. And Bryce Payne spearheads all partner and channel sales efforts, as well as maintaining relationships with existing partners at TCN. With more than 20 years of experience in the telecommunications industry, Bryce has significantly contributed to the company's success by expanding TCN's partnership across multiple sectors. We also have with us Molly Weiss, who is the Director of Marketing and Communications at Numerical. And sharing in Numerical's passion, Molly loves working with legal call originators to improve the accuracy and effectiveness on call delivery for her customers. Molly is your go-to resource for better understanding changes and upcoming trends within the calling ecosystem that may affect your ability to connect with your consumers. We also, from Numerical, we have Joe Galvin, who is the VP of Client Engagement at Numerical. And Joe is a seasoned contact center executive with a successful career spanning 30 plus years in strategic leadership roles. Joe's big picture vision, creativity, tenacity to take on tough challenges makes him an unbeatable ally for organizations looking to increase contact rates in today's evolving call delivery environment. And with that, my name is McKay Bird. I guess I failed to introduce myself, and I'm McKay Bird as well. I'm here at TCN. I'm the marketing manager, and I will be moderating today's call. And with that, we will pass the time over to Bryce to take it over from there.
Thank you, McKay, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join the webinar today. The subject of call blocking, call labeling has become more and more of a concern in the market. And so we wanted to address this subject and answer any questions and cover some of the things that have come up over the time. TCN has spent quite a bit of time analyzing the market and trying to figure out the right partnerships. Today's call, we're going to be going over call blocking, call labeling. What does it mean, scam or fraud, when it's labeled that, and how do you address it? Just as a quick overview of the agenda for the call, we'll be covering what is call blocking, stir shaken. A lot of people ask what is that, and how does that affect this overall, the overall factors with call labeling. How to establish trust in your calls, key learnings to improve connect rates, and then we'll have a question and answer period at the end to help make sure that we've covered everything that you might be concerned with. TCN has been in business since 1999, and one of our core factors of our business is the collections world, which is heavily involved in compliance, being concerned with all the various TCPA, CFPB compliance rules, and all the various things coming out from the FCC. And so we're constantly looking for the right partners. And over quite some time ago, we started interacting with Numerical and found them to be not only have a superior product, but they're really truly taking the time and staying involved in what's going on, and working with the people in Washington DC directly, being there on site in DC and meeting with the key people to be able to make sure that they stay on top of what's happening and what's changing. So we're excited to have a partner that is truly active in finding the right solutions for our clients and the clients that are out there. And so, without further ado, we'll turn the time over to our numerical partners and let them answer those questions that have been coming up over time.
Thanks, Bryce. Okay, so I'm going to start things off by introducing the call labeling technologies that are causing some of the call blocking and labeling challenges legal callers are experiencing today. So robocall identification technologies come in the form of apps that users can download onto their mobile devices, or also in the form of third-party analytics companies which provide call labeling data directly to the carrier ecosystem. These technologies were introduced to the industry to help block and label the truly illegal and fraudulent calls in order to reduce phone fraud. And these were deployed in early 2017, which is when many enterprises and call centers started to see their contact rates begin to slowly decline. These illegal robocall identification solutions along the way were discovered to be improperly blocking and labeling legal calls through the same technologies used to identify and block the illegal calls. And this situation occurs due to false positives that are generated within the call labeling analytics is one reason this is happening. These false positives are then pushed out across the carrier and app ecosystem, affecting the way your calls are then presented to consumers. So this is how a legal calling entity might find their legitimate business calls erroneously labeled as things like scam, fraud, or nuisance, or you might find that you are unable to connect at all due to potential blocking at the network or device level. And this affects a wide range of types of calls. You see a few examples of such listed here on the slide, anywhere from prescription reminders to delivery alerts to financial security or safety notifications, calls from your hotel, resort, or airline. The list goes on and on and on. And none of these types of calls are immune to experiencing some type of improper call blocking and labeling due to today's evolving ecosystem. So let's head to the next slide here. So in terms of industry response, as consumers continue to complain about robocalls to the FTC and FCC, the industry continues to move toward more aggressive solutions to combat both the illegal and the unwanted calls. One such solution that's currently being deployed and tested across the carrier and service provider network is STIR/SHAKEN. We'll dive more deeply into that in a few minutes. Another major milestone was the FCC's passing of the Declaratory Ruling this June, allowing carriers the new ability to block calls by default should they choose to do so. Additional legislation has also been growing support both in the House and in the Senate. At the end of August, also, 51 state attorneys general and 12 major voice service providers united on 8 anti-robocalling principles. Many of these all tie back to kind of the same major themes, tying back to supporting the carriers and their continued ability to offer call blocking and labeling technologies out to their subscribers, pushing towards the implementation of STIR/SHAKEN on a wider scale, and additional cooperation between telco and government to investigate and prosecute fraudulent phone activity. And then on the note of unwanted calls, most recently, Apple released its iOS 13 software update. This now includes a feature to screen unwanted calls. And I'll dive into this in more detail as well. But all in all, from an industry perspective, there's plenty of activity in this space. There's no doubt about that. But the resounding focus in all of this is still heavily on the identification of illegal call traffic and the prosecution of bad actors. So what this really means is that there's still much more work needed and participation across the major stakeholders in this space in order to more proactively and effectively identify and protect legal call traffic. We've made a lot of headway in this space, and protecting legal callers, of course, is one of Numerical's main missions here in life, and what we're going to talk about more in detail here today. So with that, let's move ahead and dive into some of these concepts in a little more detail.
Molly, before we move off that, I also just wanted to mention the PACE organization, which is a tremendous resource for information on all of the issues that you just mentioned. PACE is the nonprofit that supports the contact center industry, and from a regulatory, legislative, and educational perspective. So for folks that want to know more about what's going on in the space, either from a regulatory perspective or from an educational perspective, PACE is a tremendous resource and has a lot of written materials available, as well as seminars, webinars, and panel discussions.
Thanks, Joe. So taking a look at STIR/SHAKEN here, this tends to raise a lot of questions from enterprises on what this protocol actually means to them. What do they need to know about it? What are they supposed to do? And so the first thing we'll note here is that STIR/SHAKEN deployment is the responsibility of your service provider or carrier. And the second thing to note is that STIR/SHAKEN's primary purpose is to identify illegally spoofed call traffic in order to provide better traceability into the bad actors who are hiding behind the illegal scam calls. So illegal phone spoofing, phone number spoofing, this is where a bad actor displays a fake phone number or illegally displays someone else's phone number. This is one of the most widely used tactics of illegal scammers. So as such, better tactics to identify and stop illegally spoofed calls will provide some much needed relief from the volume of incoming illegal call traffic to all of us. So that's a great thing. So what STIR/SHAKEN does do is verify that the entity originating a call is entitled to use the phone number they're calling you on. It also validates that the phone number is a real phone number and that you can call it back. However, at its most basic level, STIR/SHAKEN does not have the ability to weigh in on whether or not you can trust the person who's calling you from this real phone number that they own and they haven't stolen from anybody else. So this additional level of entity trust, this is what will come down the line through STIR/SHAKEN attestation. This is where Numerical is working on the back end to prepare legal callers for the future of STIR/SHAKEN by establishing and linking trust to your identity through our existing entity verification and certification platform. But again, STIR/SHAKEN is a work in progress, and full development and deployment are still ahead down the road. Let's go on to the next slide. In reaction to the FCC's passing of the June Declaratory Ruling, which allowed carriers the ability to block calls by default, AT&T and Verizon were the first to start offering this capability by releasing free call blocking solutions to eligible subscribers on their network. So what this means in terms of how your phone numbers might be getting blocked at the carrier level, where subscribers have not opted out of this technology on AT&T and Verizon's networks, calls classified by their third-party analytics partners as fraudulent based on their analytics will no longer ring into the consumer's device. So what you may see as the result of this is an additional number of calls being sent straight to voicemail on these networks, and again, for the people who have opted into this. Or you might also see calls blocked at the network level with a busy signal or disconnected signal sent back to the call originator. And the interesting thing here is that the consumers will receive a notification that a call has been blocked on their device, but the carriers don't have to alert you as the call originator that this has taken place. So it's definitely a topic of much frustration here, trying to figure out what exactly is happening. But so far, these are the first two major carriers to release default call blocking. We do believe that T-Mobile and Sprint may likely also move in a similar direction, but at the time being, those two carriers are still passing through the more traditional labels that we're used to seeing when calls are classified as fraudulent by the analytics. The ever-popular scam likely is a great example of that. So moving on to blocking and labeling at the device level. Oh, let's go back one slide, please. Sorry. Thanks. Okay, so we're on the bottom here now. So what Apple has done is taken another approach to this by building in unknown call silencing into its latest iOS 13 software update. So with this new feature turned on, when an incoming call is placed, Apple's Siri Assistant will now scan your contact list, your mail app, and text messages, as well as your recently dialed outbound phone numbers to see if you've previously been in contact with the caller. If you haven't, the call will go straight to voicemail, but if you have, you are still given the option to answer the call. So although this issue is different than overcoming calls blocked at the network or device level, what this does point to is the increasing need for more transparency around who the entity is behind a call and why they're calling. Working through the iOS 13 update and similar features from other device manufacturers is going to mean more steps toward proactively identifying the number you're going to be calling your consumers on in order to maintain that uninterrupted contact. So some strategies to consider here might be, if you can, identify yourself and your phone numbers to your consumers, customers, patients, members, subscribers, etc. in advance. By email is a great strategy, or if you haven't given thought to an omni-channel calling, texting strategy yet, now is another, it's a great time to begin to evaluate this for your organization as well. And if all else fails, it's more important now as well, with more probabilities of calls going straight to voicemail, to have a really tight agent script on the voicemail messaging side to make sure the folks you're calling know who you are, why you're calling, what your message is about, and why they should invest that time to also call you back. Okay, let's jump to the next slide. So when we're talking about how to stay connected with your consumers with all of these changes happening, and there is a lot happening within the call delivery ecosystem, the key points here are staying educated on what's coming down the pipeline, and by taking some proactive steps now, there are some things you can do to achieve improvements to help maintain that contact with your customers. So one of the simplest first steps you can take is to identify yourself and your phone numbers across the carrier, analytics, and call blocking and labeling app ecosystem. Basically, tell the network who you are, why you're calling, that you're doing this compliantly, you're not a bad actor, and your calls can be trusted. So as such, numerical certification and registration solution extends to the top U.S. carriers, analytics, and app partners to give you this visibility and control to improve the accuracy of your number labeling to drive more successful call completion. By certifying your entity as a trusted caller and registering your phone numbers, you're able to remove any improper or these erroneous scam, fraud, negative labels associated with your organization's phone numbers. These will be removed at the time and also prevented from returning in the future. So this is a great help to remove two major obstacles. One, in terms of carriers blocking calls classified as fraud at the network level, and two, consumers receiving your incoming calls improperly labeled with those illegal scam type of labels that are really going to deter consumers from picking up the phone. Our certification and registration solution, which we either deliver direct to enterprise or, as Bryce mentioned, through our awesome strategic partnership with TCN, also allows an organization to identify your preferred caller ID name to further improve the presentation of your brand once that improper scam and fraud labels have been removed. And as we mentioned earlier during our exploration of the STIR/SHAKEN protocol, our trusted entity certification also prepares you for the next wave of call authentication technology through STIR/SHAKEN attestation. So now that we've made our way through the industry, the technologies, and the numerical solution, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Galvin, Numerical's VP of Client Engagement. Joe will walk us through some of the key learnings we've uncovered when it comes to taking a proactive approach to call blocking and labeling, understanding the impact of labeling unique to each organization, and developing long-term contact rate improvement strategies as a result. So with that, here's Joe.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, so we have been in this space for a couple years now, and we're still kind of, I think, cutting our way through the brush into the jungle. But there are a number of things that we have learned that we thought would be noteworthy to share and might be meaningful to folks on the call. So, number one is that there are a number of different verticals that are affected by this, and they all have different needs. So, folks who are sending financial alerts have different needs than folks in healthcare and pharmacy. Folks that are contacting people for safety and security have different needs than those who are trying to contact their clients about resort and travel. So, you know, it's forced folks to re-examine call delivery strategies that have worked quite fine for them, maybe even for decades, because there are new waters they need to navigate in. So, a couple examples of that are, revisiting the one phone number calling strategy. So, I'll say in the old days, some folks would rely on a single number that they could use for branding to contact their customers. They might move sales traffic on that line, service traffic, any number of type of customer communications. And it was a simple, clean way for folks to remember the number and know who that they were dealing with. That can work against people in the new environment, in that there are now crowdsourced applications, social media, blocking apps that all factor into the algorithms and the scoring that can rate numbers as fraud, spam, or scam. So having that one single number that's easy to remember can work against you when somebody is trying to file a complaint against you. So, that's causing people to think about that, and whether that is, although it's good from a branding perspective, it may not be helpful from a contact perspective. Some other strategies that are being re-examined are things that have been very effective, for example, in the credit or debt collection space, where folks have rotated numbers frequently, used local numbers to try to establish more reliable contact rates, not naming their company on the caller ID to try to improve contact rates. Well, the whole purpose of a lot of the regulations and the registration process is to give consumers more information about who's calling them and why. So, in order to register numbers across the ecosystem, there are in most cases caller ID naming requirements, which is causing people to step back and re-examine what they've done, and that could potentially impact contact strategies, and so they need to make decisions about what's best for them going forward. Let me move on to the next slide and share with you that, what I say is risk ratings are not a KPI. And what I mean by that is that, really the call centers rise or fall on the strength of their contact rates. But this phenomenon of spam ratings and fraud ratings is creating a lot of consternation and a lot of, in some cases, overreaction by people to make sure that their calls are not, their numbers, are not rated poorly. Well, it's surprising to me as we speak to clients and they consult with us and say, I have 100 phone numbers, 10 of them are receiving a spam label. Should I change them out? And, my first question is, well, how's your contact rate? Is that driving your contact rate up or down? And surprisingly, I hear from many folks, well, we don't track that, or I don't have access to that data. So, just swapping numbers out based on a rating can create a lot of activity that may not have benefit and could potentially have cost if those numbers are on printed material somewhere, or if there are charges from your telecom providers to replace those numbers. So, I encourage people to step back, take a deep breath, look at your contact rates, and make sure that you have a good, valid business decision before just reacting to the ratings. Lastly, and somewhat relational, we find that registration works, non-registration doesn't. So if we could move to the next slide, I'll share some data with you. We performed a case study with a client over their client base, and we looked at the contact rates pre-registration of phone numbers and post-registration of phone numbers, and saw that consistently registering of numbers had a positive impact on connect rates. Conversely, we looked at a control group who did not register numbers and saw a steady deterioration over a 90-day period when those numbers were not registered in the ecosystem. So registering your numbers can clearly assist with your contact rates, and that's a good first strategy to addressing some of the problems out there. I will hand it back over to McKay.
Yes, thank you, Joe and Molly. And we have quite a bit of time here for some questions. And actually, I would open it back up to Bryce. Do you have any insight or additional feedback on anything that was said? If not, we have a few questions here that I think we will like to address. But Bryce, do you have any other feedback or input on the topic of call blocking?
No, I think, just kind of maybe preempting a little bit, seeing one of the questions there is just helping answer the question as to what does someone need to do to kind of go through the process. So but I'll let you wrap things up, and then we'll get into the questions from there.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions, and we'll reach out to those individuals that are specifically there's quite a few questions here on what they can do to register their numbers and how that process looks. We'll reach out to you guys individually, but there's a question here that it looks like it was brought to our attention that several of our clients' numbers were found on a blacklist. Is there any way to get these third-party apps to whitelist telephone numbers? And it sounds like this might be a question for Molly or Joe.
Sure, I'll take that one. So I'd say that it's going to depend on what the blacklist is. So I'd say if the individual who sent that question in, if we should definitely connect and try to get a little more information here. There are some call blocking and labeling lists and apps who are very open to working with us, definitely are concerned about mislabeling of calls and don't want to do that, don't want to be in that business, and would love to have information coming in accurately to identify, which numbers they're improperly treating and classifying. But there's others, just to be totally transparent, there's some other providers out there who are just really focused on blocking calls and are less likely to kind of play along here. But I think there's some hope for you. So yeah, if you could give us some more information, let's look at it and we'll see exactly what we could help you figure out there.
Perfect. Next question is, and this is actually something that I was curious about as well, but if I leave my cell for a call back from a prospective customer, so they're calling, it sounds like they're calling into to receive a call back for services, will my number be blocked if they call me back or be sent to voicemail?
Can you do that one more time?
Yeah, so if I leave my cell for a call back from a prospective customer, will Apple block that call or send to voicemail?
So it sounds like if you've already, it would depend on how you've identified yourself the first time. So how you first engaged. If who you're expecting to call you back has your phone number and saved it into their contact list, then you're not going to have an issue. But if all you did so far was leave a voicemail, I don't think that's going to work. At that point, if you're expecting, and you're kind of engaging already, if you're sending this information with somebody who's on Apple using an iPhone and has this turned on, because that's the other perspective of it too. Not everybody's using this. I think first you need to identify either via text or email, or make sure the person adds you to their contact list to try to get around that.
Perfect. Next question. Do carriers share registration and trust with other carriers, or is it carrier specific?
So at this point, the carriers themselves aren't really talking to each other about this, sharing information back and forth. Although I'll say that there are some carriers that share analytics partners on the back end. So the analytics, in some cases, do have access to entity trust across kind of multiple networks. So at the algorithm analytics level, they would be able to see that. But carrier to carrier, it doesn't really work like that as much. Where you'll see more of this, though, taking place is definitely in that future level of stir shaken when this is deployed. Carriers are going to be more in the game of passing trusted calls back and forth to each other. This is something they're testing now. So in that respect, that's what we're going to see a lot more of in the future. But at this point, it's not quite there yet.
This is a follow-up to that question, Molly. Do the technology providers, the third-party apps and Apple and Google that are blocking them at, I guess, the device level, are they sharing are they sharing resources as well, or is it similar to at the carrier level?
Yeah, it's kind of similar at the carrier level too. There are a few related. So each of the carriers has a third-party analytics company. Each carrier also has a call blocking and labeling app, and some of the analytics also have their own app, and some analytics provide data out to multiple apps. So there's a little bit of kind of nested sharing within little communities, but it's not necessarily sharing on a wide scale. There's kind of little groups that share data amongst each other, but not as much of a diverse network as it should be or needs to be.
Perfect. It looks like this next question might be for Bryce. Bryce, how would this help in the collection industry? Do we have an example of how this has helped within the collections and financial services industry?
Yeah, sure. It's similar to the slide that Joe showed earlier, where in the collection industries, as you're making your outbound calls, I know a number of different clients will use rotating caller IDs or different strategies, and they start to find that their connect rate goes down dramatically, and that's because those numbers are becoming marked as spam or fraud. And so by going through the process of registration, which I'll cover on that because I've seen that that's coming up a little bit. So through numerical, the registration process is, if you want to go through the process, it's very simple. There's a registration form where you get the information about your business and the phone numbers that you want to make sure are covered under this certification process. So you fill out the form, fill out the list of phone numbers, and then through numerical, they work with all the ecosystem out there, all the people that are doing the algorithms, and they certify you with those different entities. And it takes about 30 days from the process, from you turning in the information about their business and the phone numbers. And they go through a very detailed process where they will ensure that everything is that you're a good actor, that the business is a legitimate business. They'll call every single one of the phone numbers and ensure that it does get back to the business as supposed to be. And then they register those with all the various actors in the ecosystem. It takes about 30 days for that to go through and populate to the system to where now you're basically registered with all the entities out there. And then on a monthly basis, we'll give you a portal to be able to log into and pay and stay on top of anything that starts to get labeled differently. We'll constantly monitor that over the year in and year end process on a monthly basis. So hopefully that answered the process of fill out the forms, about 30 days to get it registered, and then have a portal to be able to monitor. And then in that way, the numbers that you are using in your business process will be have a much higher probability of not being labeled and being blocked. Molly, Joe, do you guys want to add anything to that in regards to the process and any understanding of that?
Yeah, this is Joe. I'll make a couple points. So everything you described the process really well. I will say in general, our experience is that post-registration, the number of telephone lines that get labeled spam or below is in the single-digit percentage. So, 5% or less. So registration does have a downstream benefit on ratings. But, what I will also say is that people are in control of their own destiny. So the ratings are based on dialing behaviors. So if you are aggressively dialing, if you have aggressive scripting, if you are coloring outside the lines on TCPA compliance, if you're pushing the envelope on hours of operation, all of those things are going to likely give you a haircut on your risk ratings. So, and there's not, much that can be done about that without a wholesale change out of numbers.
And Joe, I'll just add to that there's an annual fee that covers the registration and the monitoring throughout the year, and that's based on how many numbers you're having monitored. It starts at 250 numbers covered at the lowest tier, and then goes up in tiers based on the amount of numbers that you want to have registered and monitored.
That's great. We have another question here. Is there a way to know if our company's phone numbers are on a blacklist prior? It sounds like they're wanting to know prior to registration, but is there a way to know if your company's phone numbers are on a blacklist?
There's not a real easy, straightforward way to do that, especially when you think about the variety of different networks out there, all the different configurations of cell subscribers, networks, and various different apps people can be using. And, labeling varies widely across all these different networks. So there's not a great, super easy way to go figure out right now if you're being labeled by any of the service providers. But one quick and easy test that seems to be pretty nice that a lot of folks do try to do is just do a little experiment internally where if you take some time and use some of your internal business lines and call some of the team members there within your organization, bonus points if you can find some that are on different cell networks, and just try testing during the normal times that you're out posting calls out to your consumers. Try calling some of your own team members, see how your phone numbers show up on your internal cell phones, and that's one great way to kind of just be able to test this from the inside. And even try calling at different times of the day to see if that makes a difference. It's a good way to kind of start testing.
Another question here. Is this technology available in the United States, or does it traverse borders, including Canada
So right now, analytics are running in the United States, but just starting to kind of get into Canada a little bit, where we found that the carriers in Canada are starting to think about this, starting to look at ways to protect their consumers against fraud. But right now, the analytics are something that's only happening in the United States in terms of their relationship to carriers. There are, though, call blocking and labeling apps all over the world. So folks in any country could download these call blocking and labeling apps to their phones as one way to filter, but they're not necessarily connected to any global carriers at this point in time, in quite the way that our carriers in the U.S. are doing things like Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and AT&T.
Cool. Yeah, we have a lot of questions that are a lot of geared towards the process and how to get set up. And we will be sharing a lot of that information after this call, and we'll be in contact and to show you guys kind of the process and if it makes sense to get some of your numbers or all of your numbers registered. And
like
there
I
is,
mentioned, Mickey, it's a really simple process, and the
yeah,
fact that we've just got a application form we send you, and then a spreadsheet that you put the phone numbers on there, and that will get it prepared for the certification process. So you definitely can get that information out to everyone that would like to see that.
very good. We have, I think we have a time for just a couple of more questions, and this one's kind of a fun question here. It says, I need convincing and an argument to convince my boss that TCN is compliant and legal to use within the debt collection industry. It's more of a statement, but Bryce or anyone, did you have anything to comment on that, or how we might be able to help there with numerical?
Sir, could you read that question one more time, just so I make sure I get the context properly?
Yep. The question is, I need a convincing argument to convince my boss that TCN is compliant and legal to use in the debt collection industry. Did you have a comment on that? I guess this would be more to Bryce.
I guess probably the best way to respond to that is the fact that that's our core is the collection industry. We've been in the industry since '99. A large percentage of our clientele are in the collections world, so everything from healthcare and across all the different verticals. And so we specifically address all the different concerns there. We have a manually approved calling platform for addressing kind of TCPA concerns and being able to have the sufficient human intervention to meet the needs when it comes to calling cell phones. We have all the different compliance rules and rules engines to be able to control the amount of calls, the amount of times you call a person in a week, all automated into a process. So we've addressed all the different concerns and tools needed to be able to meet that as being the core of our business. So we stay on top of that and make sure that the tools that we have are handy and are in the forefront of and are addressed and reviewed on a regular basis by our legal counsel.
Cool. I think we have time for one more question here. And again, just as a reminder, we will be following up with all of these questions to make sure that you get the answers you need. This last question is, this individual uses third-party contractors to do outbound sales, collections, etc. That represents our business. Do we need to work with our third-party contractors to get our numbers registered? I guess, what would that best practice look like?
Yeah, this is Joe.
Yep, go for it, Joe.
I was just going to say, yeah, so that's pretty common with our clients. So that would require that the certification for both the person requesting and the third-party center that they're using that's calling on their behalf. So they would complete 2 certification forms, one for themselves or their parent company, one for the third party that they work with, and then I would expect that probably the third party group they're using is managing their telecom strategy. So we would have the third party group fill out, all of the telephone number information for registration.
That sounds perfect. Well, we are at the final hour here, and at the top of the webinar, and I would just, as a reminder, we also have a handout in the control panel that is a recap of today's webinar that will be accessible to all the attendees here today. And I recommend that you guys download that now and review it, and to be able to use to learn additional items that we covered here today. Thank you to all of you for attending, and as well as to Bryce Payne, Molly Weiss, and Joe Galvin for the topic, and as well as the questions that they addressed. And thank you to you all again. Until next time, bye.
Thanks, McKay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.